Good afternoon, everybody. It's really nice to see everybody here and to have the opportunity to introduce this afternoon our very talented writer guest, Jennifer De Leon, who is the author of several books, including the young adult novel, Don't Ask Me Where I'm From, which was selected as a Junior Library Guild selection, as well as a collection of essays entitled White Spaces, Essays on Culture, Race, and Writing, which earned a Juniper Prize in Creative Nonfiction. Jennifer De Leon was born in Boston, is the daughter of Guatemalan immigrant parents, and while she currently lives in the Boston area, she studied near us, as she mentioned, for those of you who arrived a little bit earlier, at Connecticut College, which is in New London. There she earned a degree in international relations before earning a Master's of Arts in Teaching from the University of San Francisco Center for Teaching Excellence and Social Justice, followed by a Master's of Fine Art in Creative Writing from UMass Boston. So she's very well educated and also a very talented writer, as I mentioned before, as well as an educator. In fact, she made her way to California while in the Teach for America program and is currently an assistant professor in the Department of Creative Writing at Farmington State University, and also a faculty member in the MFA program at Bay Path University. I'm personally very impressed that you have two positions in academia. That is a tough thing to juggle. Now, both of our guest speakers' books, Don't Ask Me Where I'm From and White Spaces, dig into what it means to be a first-generation US American. And both the fictional and non-fictional examinations of this topic, De Leon develops the idea of becoming a writer as a fundamental part of finding the self. Indeed, in Don't Ask Me Where I'm From, De Leon's young protagonist, Liliana Cruz, struggles to find her place in a largely white and affluent suburban school as she is bused to each morning. One way she seeks to fit in is by anglicizing her name through the adoption of Lily as a nickname. Liliana, however, ultimately finds her voice through a creative writing class that is run at the Boston Public Library. Her work at this workshop allows her to gain confidence in herself and in her family, regardless of their immigration status in the United States. Similarly, White Spaces, which is a memoir divided into a series of short stories that sees De Leon recalling how she journeyed to Guatemala in her 20s to research and write a novel and improve her Spanish. Ultimately, however, the journey's real goal is to better understand her parents, in particular her father, who she relates had once considered abandoning her family when she was just 14 to return to Guatemala. De Leon notes that he returned after a few days, but the fact that he left her to always wonder what was in Guatemala that could lead her father to consider abandoning his family. She does not walk away from Guatemala with those answers, nor with a completed novel. Still, her time in Guatemala helps her to better understand and appreciate her father, who accompanied her to Guatemala and helped her to settle there at the start of her stay. For much of this book, De Leon highlights how lost she felt in her 20s, addicted to working out, unsatisfied with her job as a teacher, and with a dead-end romantic relationship. But most of all, by her inability to produce the novels she so wished to write. Yet in the end, she finds a therapist, meets a supportive and loving spouse, has a child, and becomes a productive writer. All to say, this collection of stories follows a narrative arc that ends on a very positive and empowering note. I think it is striking to see how De Leon's memoir and novel both highlight the challenges and power of writing, and I'm very eager to see what our guest speaker has to say about the power of writing, especially for everybody who's interested in English and writing that's here. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Christine and Carmen, for these lovely introductions and for inviting me here today and for welcoming me. Carmen, that introduction was phenomenal, and I feel inspired to write even more after you read that. So thank you. I don't take for granted for a single minute of the day that I get to do this for a living, to read and write and share stories with audiences like yourselves. So I really thank you for the presence of your presence. There's an English professor joke for you. I thought I would share a little bit today about myself and my upbringing and my inspiration for writing Don't Ask Me Where I'm From and my other books, and then maybe read a short scene from the young adult novel just to give you a flavor of Liliana's voice. But I also wanted to tailor the talk to discussing my teaching journey and specifically the intersections of teaching and writing and race and class and immigration for me. Definitely ask me questions. It can be anything about the writing life, editing life, teaching, all of that. Part of what I really love to do is pull the curtain back on the writing process. And so much of this was completely nebulous for me growing up. And so I think my missive now is to just make it clearer for others. I'll start by sharing that both of my parents were born and raised in Guatemala, and they moved to Los Angeles when they were around 18 years old, but for very different reasons. My mother moved because she took a one-way flight from Guatemala City to Los Angeles because she really wanted to change her life. She wanted something different. She wanted to work and send money home to support her 6 siblings and her parents. She grew up in poverty, and she grew up during a civil war, and she felt that moving to the United States would give her more opportunities. My father, on the other hand, moved to Los Angeles for one reason, and that reason was to earn enough money to buy a motorcycle. And the moment he had enough for that motorcycle, he would come right back home, which for him was Guatemala, and he would ride into the sunset and never look back. So of course they met and fell in love, and opposites attract, right? But how were they going to decide where to live, Guatemala or the United States? To complicate things further, my father got a job offer he couldn't refuse in Boston, Massachusetts. Neither of them had ever even heard of Massachusetts, but my father accepted the job, and a year passed where he and my mother wrote love letters that I'm still dying to get my hands on. And eventually my mother boarded another one-way flight, this time to Logan Airport in Boston. It was in Boston that they got married and they became US citizens. And they had my older sister, and then me, and then my younger sister. When I was very young, we moved to the suburbs, to a town called Framingham, about 30 minutes west of the city. That's when my life started to be divided. It's when I started code switching, although I didn't have that word for it then. During the week, I was one gen. I was, to be perfectly honest, I was white gen. All of my friends were white. All of my teachers were white. My coaches, Girl Scout leaders, everyone I knew. And that was okay because that was the only world that I knew. So I was comfortable. Still, I got questions like, why are your parents so strict? Why are you always speaking in Spanish to them? Why don't they let you sleep over? Why can't they let you have a boyfriend or even talk to boys on the phone, right? I had to explain all of these cultural elements. And on the weekends, I was a different gen. I felt more like I was Latina gen. My family and I would climb into our caravan and drive down Route 9 and head to Jamaica Plain in Boston, where we would cram into tiny apartments where my abuela lived, my tias, my tios, my primos, right? All my cousins and aunts and uncles. There was always food and laughter, and somebody was always passing around a baby or playing music. And I loved these weekends, but I also felt like I didn't fully belong, because my own cousins would ask me questions like, why do you talk like a white girl? Or they'd call me gringa. And so I had to explain. And they would say, why are you always reading a book? You must get a lot of homework. And I would tell them, it's not homework. I actually like reading. And again, that's when I learned to code switch. I changed the way I talked. I even changed the way I dressed, and definitely my mannerisms, depending on where I was. I thought, when I get to college, it's surely going to get better, but it actually got worse. I went to a private liberal arts school in New London, Connecticut College, For me, it resembled a country club, a different universe. I was suddenly immersed in a world with friends who had gone to boarding schools, who had gone to prep schools, friends whose parents were judges and CEOs, friends whose parents had gone to college, whose grandparents had gone to college, whose great-grandparents had gone to college. Neither of my parents had graduated high school, although my mother did later get her GED. And it wasn't because of lack of want, it was because of lack of opportunity. In the United States, anything was possible, according to my parents. And so education was like a massive set of keys to open any door. And I believed that, and I sort of bought that. But school, college was really challenging for me, especially that first semester. I made friends easily and quickly, and I had a lot of fun. And, I loved what I was studying, but I was on the receiving end of questions that, again, today I know to call microaggressions. The questions were like, where are you from? No, where are you from? Where are you really from? What are you? What tribe are you in? Where's the financial aid office? You know, right? Oh my God, I have a Spanish paper due in an hour. Can you write it for me? I mean, these were questions that I got, and it happened so often that I felt othered. I felt like people were signaling, you don't belong here. That might not have been their intent, but it was certainly their impact of the questions. And I started to kind of shut down. And there was one class in particular where I remember I always sat in the same place. It was a history class, a political science class. And I sat in the second row, a little bit to the right. That was my seat. And I remember feeling really like pumped up because I had a new notebook, a 5-star notebook, the expensive kind. But when I sat down and started to take notes, I noticed that others around me had laptops, not notebooks. At the time, my family barely owned one computer that we bought for $100 from a lady down the street. My parents didn't have email addresses. I barely had one. And what's ironic is that my father worked in a factory for decades, and his job was to spray paint computer parts for desktop computers. So I like to think that he was manifesting it, right? Putting it in the air that one of his daughters would become a writer. But that day in class, I was silenced and I felt like I really didn't belong. And I went back to my dorm and called my mother, collect, using an MCI calling card, which was only for emergencies. But this was an emergency. And I told her, I don't think I can do this. I need to come home. I think I need to transfer. I don't know if college is for me. And she cleared her throat. She laughed a little bit. That's what my mother does sometimes. She completely subverts my expectations. And she said, listen, some people in life are born on third base. So to get to home base, they don't have to run as far, and it's not as difficult. You were not even born on the field, but guess what? There you are in the same game, and you have every right to play. You should feel proud that you didn't have to go to prep school and didn't have all this education before you got to college, and you're still in the same room with those kids. So make the most of it. Run faster. Do what you need to do. And I will never forget that talk because it lit a fire under me. And I thought, okay, work smarter, not harder. So one thing that I did was when I have a paper due, I would turn it into the professor a week early and ask for feedback. And I would take that feedback and I would revise the paper and then turn it in on time. And I would earn a good grade always. That was a strategy that I used. I couldn't email my papers to my parents, but I could go to the writing center. I couldn't ask my parents for money. I didn't have a bank account, but I could babysit for professors on campus. So I made it my mission to make a way, and I stayed in college. Still, I didn't have the guts to major in English. I majored in international relations, mostly because I wanted to study abroad. And I knew my parents would have to let me if it was attached to school, if travel was attached to school. So I studied abroad for a semester in Vietnam, another semester in France, and I did an internship in Lagos, Nigeria, where I interned at the United Nations. When I was in each place, I traveled to neighboring countries. So by the time I graduated college, I traveled to 12 different countries, all part of my scholarship. There's no way I would have been able to do that without attaching that to school. But all the while I was writing, and I knew I wanted to be an author someday, but I had no clue how to do it. I didn't know a single author. All the authors I knew were dead white men: Richard Yates, Raymond Carver, Ernest Hemingway, James Salter, writers whose work I really admired. But it wasn't like I could ask them, hey, how do you do this writing thing? I only read a Latina author for the first time when I was 19 years old, The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros. I'll never forget sitting in that blue chair in the library at Connecticut College and reading that book. It had been assigned in one of my English courses. And I couldn't believe there were words in Spanish in the text that was written in English. I couldn't believe there were characters that reminded me of my mother, my father. I didn't know I was allowed to write in this way. And so that day, I remember being washed over by this feeling of permission, like, you can do this. It would take many years for me to hold my first book in my hands that I wrote, but to give you a glimpse, I graduated, I moved to California and joined the Teach for America program. I studied with Herb Cole at USF in the Center for Teaching Excellence and Social Justice, studied work by Paulo Freire, Bell Hooks, so many other educators that were doing really important work and revolutionary work. And I was sold. I wanted to be a teacher for life beyond those 2 years. I moved back to Boston and taught in Boston public schools for off and on for 10 years. One of the first schools where I worked was called Community Academy. And this was a school for students who had had interrupted schooling and were returning to finish their degrees. So these are students who had had a baby, had been imprisoned, were homeless, lots of interruptions in their schooling. And it was really challenging because I felt like I needed a degree in psychology and social work, just as much as teaching. But I stuck with it, and I eventually started teaching ESL and ELA from 7th grade all the way through 12th grade, and some creative writing in there. I then switched to teaching college. I love teaching college. I worked as a counselor in College Access in Roxbury for a couple of years, and my thesis in graduate school was on the subject of what college access looks like in the elementary school classroom for Latino students. So I felt like all my interests were swirled together. But when I was teaching middle school and high school, I felt that there was a book missing on the bookshelf. And Toni Morrison has this great quote where she says, if there is a book in the world that you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you need to be the one to write it. And I remember hearing that quote and thinking, damn, now I have to do it. Now I have to write this book. And for me, the book is Don't Ask Me Where I'm From. It's the book that I wish I had had in college, even before in high school. It's also the book that I wish I had been able to pass to many of my students, young Latinas or not, right? Anyone. But it's a book that I craved. I'd never seen a book with a Latina on the cover. And although I had read more Latina authors since that day I first read House on Mango Street, I could count them on my hands. Books, as you know, being in education, are windows and mirrors. Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop coined that lovely phrase where she explained that books can be windows into other worlds, other experiences that you might not have anything, that you don't know anything about, or they can be mirrors where you see your experience reflected or pieces of it. I have thought about this a lot, and I feel like my life's work is to create those windows and mirrors for students, for younger versions of myself, for my former students. My next book, White Space, Essays on Culture, Race, and Writing. This is a collection of different essays that I've written really over the last 10 years. A lot of people think I published this I wrote this during the pandemic, and I have to explain, I published it during the pandemic, but I definitely didn't write it during the pandemic. I didn't know I was writing an essay collection. I wrote each essay on its own. And before I knew it, I had a body of work, and I realized I was telling a larger story, greater than the sum of all the parts. When I was 28, I quit my job and I moved to Guatemala. And as Carmen was sharing, large reasons why I went had to do with wanting to learn more about the history of Guatemala, right? And the war there. I'd heard bits and pieces, but I had never really given myself permission to understand more about the history. I also wanted to improve my Spanish, and I really wanted to live there. I had visited many times as a child with my sisters, right? My parents. We joked that we were on an invisible leash because we just did like the living room tour. We just visited family after family after family. And I wanted to live there. I wanted to ride the bus. I wanted to shop for my own food. I wanted to take classes and have friends and go to the coffee shops and travel to other parts of the country. And I did all that. And it was exhilarating and rewarding and amazing, but it was also really hard because I think I realized that I was more North American, estadounidense than I thought. I also write in here about my writing journey and how I learned to take up space on the page. So white space is a double entendre in that way. And I have more to say on that. I'm actually working on a memoir now. It's tentatively called Permission. And it's a memoir where I kind of delve a little deeper into my writing journey. But I also want to give a nod to my first book, Wise Latinas, Writers on Higher Education. This is an anthology of essays by Latina writers reflecting on their experiences in college. And it's a real full circle moment for me because Sandra Cisneros has an essay in the collection. And her essay, Only Daughter, in it, she shares how her father said to her once, Sandra, you went to college for 4 years and then 2 more years of graduate school, and still you have no husband. You wasted all that education. And this is Sandra Cisneros, right? It's like, so for her to share that and be vulnerable, really creates space for others to share their stories. And that's what I love the most, I think, about writing is the story is an occasion for others to share their own stories. But I have a couple of slides that I wanted to share. And these are my books, as I mentioned, and I have my Instagram and Twitter handle up here in case you'd like to follow me. I always include a map of Guatemala. I know that you all know where it is, but when I do school visits, sometimes there are students who are curious as to the actual geography, like, where is it? I've heard of it, but where is it? And I tell them it's a country just south of Mexico, the size of the state of Louisiana, and it gives them some perspective. This is my family in the 80s in Framingham in our first home. And that's me walking away. I think I was always kind of adventurous and just wanting to see what else was out there. But this is a slide that I really wanted to show you right now. And maybe it's one you've seen before as your educators or educators in training. But this was a study done by the Cooperative Children's Book Center at the University of Wisconsin in 2018. So really only 3 years ago, which is not that long at all in publishing. And it's an infographic showing the percentage of characters by ethnicity that are portrayed in children's books published in that 1 year. So you can see that of the books published in 2018, 50% are characters of color. And you only have 5% Latinx characters. And Latinx people are about to be like 50% of the population in like 1 minute. So 5% is extremely low. And these are characters, not even authors. So the percentage of authors is 3% actually. So it's even less. 1% American Indian, 7% Asian Pacific Islander, 10% African American. we don't even have Muslim characters on here because it wasn't enough to even make 1%. 27% of the characters in 2018 were animals or other. That's more than the combined total of characters of color. I have nothing against bears. I have 2 young kids, ages 8 and 3, and they actually love the Berenstain Bears. I don't think that we should stop publishing books with characters that are animals, but this graph really begs the question of why? Why are there more books with animals than there are of children of color combined? So this is a large part of what inspires me to write my own books and to keep going. So my next YA novel will come out in August. It's called Maya, and it tells the story of a 16-year-old young woman named Maya in Guatemala City. She's an aspiring fashion designer, and she gets caught up with one of the maras, the gangs, and she gets into some trouble, and she and her mother have to flee in the dead of night. And they make it to the Guatemala-Mexico border and then the Mexico-US border, where they cross and are caught by Border Patrol and then separated. I really wanted to write this story because I was frustrated with the narrative that I was seeing in the media, that Guatemalans in particular were coming to the United States seeking asylum, but really our former president believed that they were bringing rape and crime, etc. And I thought, if we don't have counter narratives to disrupt this single story, as Chimamanda Adichie talks about in her amazing TED Talk, The Danger of the Single Story, then what options are we giving young people? What alternatives are we showing them to make up their own minds? I think that young adult literature is really powerful. And I just love that you're social studies educators and English teachers, because you are able to be on the front lines and influence young people in ways that are really profound and immediate and long lasting. It's, again, a privilege and a responsibility to do this work. And I'm just really excited to engage in a conversation with you. I think I'll end by reading a short scene, and then I'm looking forward to your questions. So for those of you who aren't totally familiar with the book, it follows Liliana Cruz, who's 15. She's struggling to fit in a MECO program in Boston, is where she lives. And the MECO program is actually a real program. It's been around for over 50 years. And the program has students of color take a bus every morning to neighboring white affluent towns to quote unquote get a better education. So Liliana is new to MECO at Westburg High, fictional high school I totally made up, and she's trying to fit in. But she's got boy drama, little brother drama, mom drama, best friend drama, all the while her father is missing, although she realizes that he's not really missing, he's actually been deported. And up until this moment, she had no idea that her parents were undocumented. So this is a real coming of age novel. And it's also one that raises questions of identity and class and race and immigration. In this scene, it's about a third of the way through the book. She hasn't spoken up in class, and it's in a history class. In third period world history, I couldn't believe it. We were starting a unit on Central American immigration. It was part of a larger unit on immigration as part of a year-long theme of reading like a historian. Guess who finally read that syllabus? I noticed that this school gave unique names to their courses instead of the basic English, art, math, history, etc. Like there was one senior English course called American Rebels and Romantics, and yeah, Central American immigration. But why couldn't we just study the Civil War or the Vietnam War or some other war? There were enough of them. At the same time, I was kind of curious. Maybe I could learn more about, I don't know, how my family got here, about dad. At the same time, I didn't want the extra attention on me because sadly, it didn't seem like there were any other MECO kids in the class. So I knew the attention would be on me. Our teacher, Mr. Phelps, started things off by holding a class debate. First, he projected this onto the whiteboard from his computer. The United States federal government should substantially increase its legal protection of economic migrants in the United States. He read it out loud a couple of times. All I could hear was the hot hum of his laptop. Why was he showing us this? Because of the president's build a wall obsession? What kind of a wall anyway? And who would actually build it? Okay, if getting our brains spinning was his goal, he'd succeeded. As if he'd read my mind, Mr. Phelps tapped his keyboard and up came a picture of the president wearing a blue suit and red tie and speaking into a microphone. A speech bubble said, "We want a great country. We want a country with heart. But when people come up, they have to know they can't get in. Otherwise, it's never going to stop." What? I glanced around, but no one else seemed as outraged as I was, or else they had freaking good poker faces. Next, Mr. Phelps played a short clip from a documentary about child migrants trying to flee Central America to the US by climbing cargo trains that traveled up through Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Mexico. In the clip, two teenage boys were lying on top of a massive train, the wind flattening their hair, the sun in their eyes as they tried desperately to hang on tight as the train blasted through a tunnel in a mountain. I gasped out loud. The clip ended right before the train moved into the darkness. This time, everyone moaned. Someone shouted, "Oh, come on, you can't do that. Play the rest of the video." Mr. Phelps looked all smug, like his unit hook had worked. Well, it had. We were interested, invested, sitting up. He then explained how the debate would work. We would argue for or against these quotes. Simple. Hands flew up, left and right, not mine. One kid said, "Who can't get in? You mean immigrants? Look, we're all immigrants. Seriously, you should just give the country back to the Native Americans." I nodded. I mean, she had a point. Yeah, but then what happens to all of us? There are like 500 million people in the United States. Where are we all supposed to go, huh? A girl in the front row asked. Another student raised his hand. Well, those quotes you showed kind of raise a good point. If people think they can just like keep getting in, then yeah, it's never going to stop. You know what? We should build a wall. A guy in the back jumped in next. Well, I don't know about the wall, and I'm not against immigrants or whatever, but they should come educated and like without any diseases. Diseases? Wow. Totally, two other guys joined in. That's totally unfair. Didn't Europeans bring over smallpox or whatever? A guy by the door asked. Whatever, we're talking about today, the girl beside me said. Don't whatever me, doorboy said. All the voices started to blend in and I couldn't tell who was saying what. I just know that the next comment was from the kid in front of me. I'm sorry, but this is just wrong. You can't deny people their human rights. They go through all that trouble to get here, and then what? We spray tear gas on them when they're steps from the border, or we're just going to send them back? If I slouched any lower, I'd fall out of my seat. Then Mr. Phelps did something I abhorred. He called on me directly. "Miss Cruz, do you have anything you'd like to add?" "Oh, crap. No," I said fast. "You sure?" He was so aggy. I dug my nails into my thighs. Yep. Now everyone was staring at me. Mr. Phelps squatted beside my desk like he was my personal coach. "The class may seem hard now, but stick with it," he said in a low voice. Then he stood up and clicked to the next screen, some pie chart with statistics. Humiliation complete. I flipped up my hood. Hard? I was used to hard, like 2 weeks worth of laundry in one day because mom never left the couch anymore. Like standing over Christopher and Benjamin until they brushed their teeth and flossed. But explaining my perspective on immigration to a bunch of white kids in a richy rich school, that wasn't hard. Nah, that was just annoying. There's Liliana Cruz for you. So thank you so much for listening. I'm really excited and eager to engage in a conversation. Does anyone have any questions? You can type them in the chat, or you can put your camera on and ask me directly.
You can raise your hand so we know, and Carmen can, I'll call on you, or Carmen will call on you.
I have a couple of questions, or does Danielle have a question?
Yep.
Go ahead, Danielle.
Hello. So what if there is a specific thing, or if it's a combination of inspirations, what was your inspiration for Liliana? Like, was it your life? Was it a combined effort of your life, your mom's life, or a bunch of people that you knew? Like, what exactly were you thinking when you created that character?
Yes, I love that question. Thank you for kicking us off. I wrote Liliana's character originally. I wrote her character in the third person and set in the 90s, because that's when I was a teenager. So I thought, oh, I'll just set it in the 90s, and didn't really think much of it. And then I attended a writing conference where it was kind of like speed dating, but with editors. And they read 10 pages of your work ahead of time, and then you met with them. And this one editor said, have you considered making this contemporary and writing it in first person? And I thought, no and no. I mean, there's no way I can write from a teenager's perspective like today. I don't even know what a teenager sounds like. And then I caught myself. I had at least 100 students on my roster every single year. I drove home some days and fell asleep some nights and couldn't get them out of my ear. And so I thought, yeah, I do know what a teenager sounds like. And when I started rewriting in first person, Liliana took the mic and did not let go. It was amazing how just changing that, making that shift from third to first POV really unlocked so much of her character. She's a composite of myself, of former students, and just fiction. I didn't have the experience of having parents who were undocumented. As I shared, both of my parents became US citizens before I was born, but I have several cousins who have been and are in that situation. And I had several students who were too. And it's really intense and can be really traumatic. And again, it's something I rarely, if ever, saw in fiction. And I wanted to honor that part of the story through Liliana's father. But Liliana and I do share a lot in common. We both love the color purple. We both love writing. I don't have brothers. I have two sisters, but that's the fun of fiction, is you can kind of change it up. But thank you for asking that.
And Carlos put a question. Did you see the question in the chat?
Yes. Has becoming an author allowed you to connect with other Latin authors? Yes. That's one of the beautiful parts of this experience. When I took my first writing class in Boston, I was scared. I was 26 years old the first time I took my first class in creative writing. And I remember feeling like an imposter, right? Feeling like an outsider, thinking, oh my God, can I really do this? But then I took part in a writing conference called VONA, Voices of Our Nation Arts Foundation. And this was, at the time, the only writers of color conference in the country, in all genres. And I was able to study fiction with Junot Diaz. And I studied with him for several summers in a row. I just kept taking his workshop again and again. And he really changed so much of the way I saw writing and the way I saw myself as a writer. I wrote for a long time trying to write like those dead white authors. I wrote in a way that was trying to sound like I was the female Latina version of James Salter, right? Mm-hmm. But it was inauthentic. But when I started writing Liliana's character, first in short stories, actually, I felt like I found a vein, and I was able to really draw from that. And the great part about being in the writing community is that, especially for writers of color, there's so few of us, truthfully, that you feel this kind of like connection and you really want to help each other. And so when I was in VONA, I felt immediate community. And I was able to meet Cristina Garcia and Francisco Goldman. And then I joined Macondo, which is a creative writing workshop that Sandra Cisneros started. I met Elena Maria Viramontes, Marjorie Agosin, Reina Grande, who's a great friend now, and now I'm part of a Latina author group, and we meet on Zoom and we're always on chat, so Angie Cruz, Carolina de Robertis, Yakira Diaz, so many others, Melissa Rivero. It just feels like, I don't know, I guess the writing class I always dreamt of when I was growing up. But thank you for that. Yes, to more Latino authors. Are you interested in writing children's books? This is from Louise. I'm thinking about authors such as Meg Medina and Jacqueline Woodson, who write both YA and children's literature. Louise, I love this question because I forgot to mention that I do have 2 children's books that I just sold that'll be coming out in the next few years. And one is called So Many Gifts. And it's a story of 2 cousins, 2 primos, right? One is in Massachusetts and one is in Guatemala. And they meet at a mercado in Guatemala, at a market. And they're both searching for the perfect gift for the other cousin, but they don't know it. And I'm really excited to see what the illustrations will look like for this book, because I have no say, no control. But I wrote that book. And the second children's picture book will be a picture book biography of Nobel Peace Prize winner Rigoberta Menchú. And you historians know what a pivotal figure she was, and yet so many people don't know who she is. And I would love to honor her story in a children's picture book and really kind of shed light on her journey. So thank you for asking that. Rachel, do you have a different writing process for novels versus short stories versus picture books? I will say that the one thing that I have that's a common denominator for all of these is deadlines. I absolutely thrive off of deadlines. It doesn't matter if they're arbitrary. Sometimes I tell my husband, just give me a date and time. I need to work on this essay, and he'll say, okay, December 11th. And I don't know what it is. It gives me a certain energy. But in terms of the writing process for novels, they definitely take longer. I would say I probably do the most research for novels, and it's not something I would have thought about before. I thought novels were purely fiction and just kind of fell from the sky. But now I have learned that there's a tremendous amount of research that goes into novels. For this novel, I met with students in the METCO program, and I did kind of like qualitative interviews, and I had them read drafts, and I shadowed them at a couple different high schools, and I took notes like crazy, but not notes on like statistics or percentages or years even, but more like what's in their locker, what's on the hallways in high schools these days, what snacks are kids eating, just kind of like the sensory details and images. And that was really fun and exciting. And for this latest YA novel, I went to the US-Mexico border. I went to McAllen, Texas, and I volunteered at a humanitarian respite center where basically migrants who have been processed in an ICE detention center are then taken on a bus and through this humanitarian respite center and the Catholic Church, they're able to stop there, get a good night's sleep, take a shower, have hot food, make phone calls, contact their sponsors, and have their dignity restored. And it was so important for me to volunteer here and just witness a lot of the migrants' journeys and experiences and talk to them and write down details. And it's probably some of the most important work I've ever done in my life. And I'm excited to publish this book, to get it out in the world, but also to talk to young people about it and others, just to engage with the story. Short stories, I think about them for a long time and then just kind of write a quick draft. And then I might sit on them for a couple years before I go back to it. Short stories, I think, are their own beast, definitely a different kind of challenge. Every single word counts. It's much more compressed. Picture books seem like they would be easier because they're only 700 words or so. But man, those 700 words are, you really, really consider every single one. And it's a challenge because you can't rely on description, because there's an illustrator who is going to provide illustration. So I can't say like, it was a sunny day in Bear County. Nope. An illustrator would have the sun rising in the illustration. So I can't say that because it would overwrite their art. Anyway, it's a little complicated to explain, but it's fascinating. But I think I love picture books now. Carlos, do you think your perspectives on being a Latina in American society would be different if you were not so exposed to white communities? Yes, that's the short answer. I feel like my parents were part of the generation that thought it was better to have us assimilate. And they were trying to, I hate to even say the word, protect us from what? I don't know, maybe from discrimination, from microaggressions. They wanted us to fit in. They wanted us, even with our names. My mother said she intentionally gave us first names, Karen, Jennifer, Caroline, names that could be pronounced phonetically, that would be easy for people to say. And by people, she means white Americans, right? How would my worldviews be different if I knew nothing about growing up in white neighborhoods and attending white schools? Profoundly. And that's a question I really consider often. What if my parents had never moved to Los Angeles? What if they had moved back to Guatemala? And I grew up there. Or what if we stayed in Los Angeles and didn't move to Boston? I would have seen many more communities that looked like me and talked like me. Boston, and specifically the suburbs of Boston, were incredibly white and still are to some degree. And I do think that influenced me. Of course, your upbringing influences you, but I missed out on so much of my culture and language and experiences. I studied French, not Spanish, because I was afraid I was going to be embarrassed and ashamed of messing up a language that I should know. Now we know it's different. There are classes for heritage speakers, and there are students who study English in the same way that students should be allowed to study Spanish, right? Grammar and literature and speaking. And I see hopefully some new waves in education for that, to empower young Latinos instead of making them feel like they need to hide parts of themselves just to survive. But thank you. Those are really important questions. You're making me want to go to the page. The word essay comes from the French word essayer that Montaigne coined, and it means to try. So essays are an attempt to try and figure out answers to these complicated questions. Thank you for the writing prompt, Carlos. Okay, I think, I see your hand raised. Do you want to ask a question, Regine?
Go ahead, Regine, you're unmuted. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. I was, since I sometimes feel like I live in the world of young adult literature, one of the books that I recently was considering with groups of students was My Name Is Not Easy. And it was about the experience of Indigenous children in schools, run by the Catholic Church. And I don't know if I'm just feeling a bit more hopeful in terms of issues related to social justice, race, immigration, because we see the church as being such a strong advocate for families trying to, individuals families, children come into the country. And I was just wondering, how do you see faith and organized religion shaping the experience of the individuals that you write about in any of your texts?
Yeah. Yes. Thank you for that beautiful question. Faith is a huge part of the protagonists in my novels and stories. It's a huge part of their character and character motivations. And I would say like the crux of fiction, of story, right, has to do with a character desiring something and wanting something. And then there's something in the way. And the question then becomes, what is that character willing to do to get it? And that's where I feel like the engine of the story really starts to roar. And for lots of my characters, they have these desires that are grand, that are big, and faith plays a huge role in helping them to feel like these are possible pursuits. I know that was the case for my own parents just in moving to this country. And for many, people today, as we speak, who are ready to cross. At dinner, the prayer, I learned this in McAllen, that at dinner, when people say grace, right, for their meal, dinner, unlike breakfast and lunch, they make a special prayer for migrants who are about to begin their journey, crossing the desert at night. And I remember hearing that, and it just sent chills down me, because I realized like, this is just a huge leap of faith. How can you trust a coyote? How can you trust that your water will last how long you need it? How can you trust that you won't find danger and violence? How can you trust that when you get to the United States, it will be anything like the picture you had in your mind? The amount of faith that migrants have is so profound to me. I sometimes actually can't believe it. And then to know that they're met often with such horrific barriers it makes me ashamed. And it makes me have very complicated feelings about, growing up in the United States. It's probably enough to write about for many lifetimes, but I will try to do my part. But I love that question. No one's really ever asked that.
Carlos, you have a question?
Yes, please. Well, actually, what I have is more of a comment. I find it unfortunate that your question of the book, don't ask me where I'm from, has turned into such an aggressive sort of statement, when for the 350,000 years that we have lived mostly as hunter-gatherers, that was a wonderful question. That was a question of wanting to bring people together. I don't know you. I've never seen your face. I don't want to have to fight you. Where are you from? And if you say such and such a place, oh, I have a cousin there. And then we go from that to figure out, okay, do you know my cousin? I'm looking for ways of getting together with you, of coming closer. And now it's a way of pushing people apart. Where are you from? Where are you really from, as you said?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's why I always like to say, I don't think it's inherently a bad question. It really depends on the way it's asked. And I remember when the book first came out, someone on Twitter, I want to say from Switzerland or something, wrote and said, oh, but we ask each other that all the time when we travel, when we go hiking, and you meet somebody on the trail, and that's, like you said, it's a point of connection. But what's happened is the way it's been asked, and specifically for people of color, it's like, oh God, here we go again, because it's like, why are you asking me that? Why aren't you asking her that? Why are you asking him that? Why do you see me and assume I must be from somewhere else. And the thing is, like, it's entirely up to the person to answer however they want. So sometimes I will say, oh, Boston. And it's like, you know, the person wants so badly to be like, no, I meant really, where are you from? And I'm like, no, I'm really from Boston. Actually, I'm really from the hospital in Boston, and really from my mother. You know, like, you can get sassy and everything, but it depends. If someone is asking me and I feel that they're genuine, I'll answer them, because I'm not ashamed of where I'm from. I'm very proud of the many places I'm from. And my hope is that Liliana at the beginning has this sort of front, like, don't ask me where I'm from, just do not. But by the end, she's like, you know what, ask me and I'll be happy to tell you. And I want that for young people, you know, too, because you know what I'm finding too, in a lot of these school visits that I'm doing is, a lot of times Latino students will come up to me afterwards and say, you know, I feel like I can relate so much to this book, and I don't speak Spanish, and I sometimes want to know more about insert Latin American country, right? But I just feel like I don't have a connection to it. I've never been there. And it's really, I think, something we should think about and consider in this next phase, because these are students who look the part, right? Or look what maybe many white Americans might view as immigrants or first gen, but actually they might be third generation. They might have grown up here. They might speak English only. They might not know how to place their parents' or grandparents' country on a map, but they're still experiencing the discrimination. And so it's like this double identity crisis. And that's going to be challenging. It already is. I see it. It's almost like they feel this shame for not knowing about the history of the country. And it's like, that's a whole lot to know. And it's certainly not covered in a lot of the curriculum, as we all know. It certainly wasn't covered in mine. In my high school in world literature, maybe we got like 1 week on Cuba, but that was it. And when I was in college, I took a Latin American history course, and it was like my eyeballs were just like, what? Nicaragua, El Salvador, like I had no idea. And then I asked my parents, like, why didn't you tell me all this? And they just were like, I don't know, you know? So there's a lot to explore there. Oh my goodness. And this week right now actually is the National Conference for Social Studies Teachers. I forget what it's called. I know I'm doing a session with them on Sunday morning. The National Council of Social Studies Teachers. It's for high school and middle school teachers of social studies. It was supposed to be in Minneapolis, but it's virtual now. But I'm excited that the novel is kind of being picked up in lots of humanities courses, and so we'll see. It's also being adapted into a TV series with Amazon Prime. So I will keep you posted on that. Please join my newsletter through my website. And I'll put my Instagram and Twitter handles here. NCTE, yes, that's what it is. National, oh, also, that's for English teachers. Oh my God, both of those are this week. Yes, it's a very busy week. Yeah, and Facing History has also, we've been talking about using this book as part of a unit in their ESL programming, which I think will be really exciting. You know, I think a lot of students want to know more. It's just hard to have access.
So we're getting shorter on time. Does anybody, we still have time for, a couple more questions, but anybody, other questions? Carmen, oh, Carlos has another question. It's a good question.
Yes, it's a great question. Yes. I will tell you that I will list some resources in the chat because there's so many great resources out there. But in general, publishing a novel or essay collection or stories, unlike maybe academic articles or books, you usually need an agent, a literary agent, and my agent, Faye Bender, I will give her my manuscript and she might give me some feedback on it. And then she sends the manuscript to different editors, often in New York. And we hope that more than one bites. In the case of Don't Ask Me Where I'm From, there were several editors interested, and I was on the phone with them for a couple of weeks. And we eventually went with this one amazing editor, Caitlin DeLuey at Simon & Schuster. And what happens is they agree to buy the book. It takes a couple months to sign the contract and all of that, but then you work with the editor. You go back and forth on revisions. Then the book goes to the copy editor. A cover is designed, marketing and sales. You start to have meetings. It takes a long time. It took 2 years from when I sold the manuscript to when I, held it in my hands. But it's so exciting and rewarding, and there's nothing like it. And every book is different, right? Some books take 10 years to write, others just kind of fall out in 3 months. It depends, but I know that it's something that there, like I said, there are more resources now. So there are creative writing centers, there are conferences. A great resource is the magazine Poets and Writers. They have information on classes, they have interviews with editors and agents, publishers. And I should say that what I just described is going through a Big Five publisher, again, in New York City. It's very traditional publishing, but then you can also go through a small press. Whitespace won the Juniper Prize, and so the University of Massachusetts Press published it. And it's a smaller press, so, smaller staff, smaller budget. But I would say what they lack in those numbers, they really make up for in heart and in care for the book. And I know everyone at the press by first name. We're on emails all the time. There are advantages, I would say, to both, not really disadvantages, just different advantages to both. But what I love about small presses is that you can enter your manuscript in contests. And if you win the contest, your prize is publication. So you don't need an agent if you go that route. I hope that helps a little bit, but you can always email me through my website and I'm happy to answer questions. And stay tuned for my memoir that will be about my writing journey and hopefully share more information.
So again, we're moments away from wrapping this up. Carmen, do you want to any final thoughts, and then we'll all, I think, just say farewell and have a good night.
I just want to thank you, Jen, for taking the time to speak with us. I think everybody here really enjoyed getting to know a little bit about your journey and also your lovely character, Liliana. And just thank you so much for taking the time to write as well. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Please stay in touch, everyone. I'm a real person. I answer my emails. And if you'd ever like me to visit your school, I know many of you are already, if not about to teach middle school and high school or secondary social studies, history. I would love to stay in touch for this book and for my future books.
That would be great. It would be so nice to see you in person.